now we have this bombardment of other technologies. Why is the skill of reading itself important?
Well, it is for so many reasons. It's a way of taking the world in, the world that's created in the book. You take it into you in such an intimate way, in such a unique and individual way. No one else experiences the book the way you do. And so not only do you take the book in, but you also recreate the book by reading it. You breathe life back into it again, because it's dead if nobody ever opens it up and reads it. So there's this reciprocity going on where, it is filling you, but you are filling it as well. You're keeping the book alive. So that's one reason. The other reason that just pops into mind as I'm kind of feeling my way through this is that the world is a tough place, and a lot of times the lessons we learn are really hard. We learn them the hard way by experiencing them. When you experience life through a character in a book, you have that. It's almost a first-hand experience because you are taking it in. It is becoming part of you. And so when you are confronted with an experience that is challenging, you have a little bit of background now. You can come to it with a little bit of balance or steadiness or assuredness that, okay, I can do this. I remember this. So-and-so, the character in that book that I read 2 years ago, she went through that or he went through that. And if they got through it, I can get through it too. Which is especially where those issue novels are important, because just kids confront so much difficult stuff.
What was your favorite book in your childhood, and how do you think that has affected you in your adult life, being a writer or just being a person? How do you think it's affected you?
My favorite book was Horton Hatches the Egg. So we're on a Dr. Seuss theme here. When I was little, Dr. Seuss was writing. So I would go to my librarian, my public librarian, and I would say, are there any new ones? Are there any new ones? Because I would read them as fast as they came out. Horton Hatches the Egg was really special. I don't know if you remember it, but it's the story of an elephant who is just passing by a mother bird who's sitting on the nest, and the mother bird does not want to stay on the nest. She wants to fly away and do something else, and she cons the elephant into sitting on her nest for her and hatching her egg. And he promises that he will, and he does, through the most challenging hardships. He has terrible weather that he sits through. He has the hunters who come. He has other animals who make fun of him. And then he's carted away for the circus. Anyway, he goes through this ordeal, but he's made a promise. He's committed himself to this egg, and he sits on it until it hatches. And when it hatches, I shouldn't give it away. So everybody should go and read Horton Hatches the Egg. But what I learned from that book was the importance of a commitment, and the fact that perhaps not all mothers are cut out to be mothers, but there are other people out there who can be surrogate parents for you, and you can make it through just fine. And so that book I embraced with my heart and my soul. It was just the book I needed at a time when I was starting to ask questions about promises and commitments, and it answered them all in such a beautiful, poetic way. So that was the book.
We haven't heard a Seuss one yet. A lot of Pippi Longstocking.
Which I loved, but didn't resonate for me the way Dr. Seuss did.
Mine was Angelina Ballerina.
No, that's a good one.
Because I wanted to be a ballerina.
And you're the one who's doing the dance.
Let's see. Have you utilized any new media in marketing your books? Do you have a website that you have, and have you used it in any ways?
I don't use it at all in that way. I don't have a website. I don't have a Kindle. I don't have an iPod. I do use the internet for research. I do use the internet for finding reference materials. In the past, if I found a bibliography that cited a book that was out of print, I might be able to get it through interlibrary loan. But if I needed it for a year while I was doing the research for the book, interlibrary loan was not going to work for me. And I had no way of finding the book. Now, I can go online and find that book, whether it's in Australia or Germany or, South America. I can find the book. I can buy the book. I can have the book. And I could not do that before the internet. I also just love, there are certain fact checks that you have to do when you come near the end. And you want to find out the real name for that ball that circles around and has the mirrors in it. What's the name of that thing? Well, checking it on the internet is pretty handy. It's also handy to go to the OED, but it's also pretty handy to go on the internet. It's just a few keystrokes and you've got it. So I do use it in that way, but not in a marketing way. I leave that up to my publishers. In the case of Brooklyn Bridge, Jean Feiwell just had the brilliant idea of doing a video, because I'm very shy about traveling. And she came up here with a camera crew, and they shot a video, and then they put that online. So rather than, I don't know how else they distributed it, but it was made available online, and people can now see me who might never have a chance.
I did see that video. And it was just, you were just talking about Brooklyn Bridge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that on YouTube.
That was very spooky.
So, it works. If you're looking for you. Here, we'll pause it for now, since they just came in. Good. Okay, so first off,
Oh wait, should I speak to the camera or to you?
to me.
Okay.
I mean, it's okay if you go over there every once in a while, but mainly, you can just talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer and how you got to be a children's author?
Okay. Hey, my name is Tobin Anderson. I run under the name M.T. Anderson. And I have written books I've written picture books for younger kids. I've written novels for middle grade readers, and then also novels for teens, including this, which is The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, Traitor to the Nation, which won the National Book Award. And Feed, which is a science fiction story. So this actually takes place in the 18th century, and this takes place sometime in the late 21st century. So I have tried to write a kind of a range of things, ranging over the centuries, ranging through different styles, that kind of thing.
How do you do the research for your books, especially about Feed, which is a little more futuristic, and talking about kind of the play on where we're going as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that idea come from, and how did you do research for that?
Well, I mean, I think that in Feed, the main thing was, first of all, I was satirizing things that I felt were already happening in the society. I mean, it was written in 2001. But at the same time, already by that point, I felt that there were certain trends, technological trends, intellectual trends, which I felt like, by exaggerating them, I could investigate what, in a sense, was happening to us right then, right now. And so really, I think, even though the technology of the book is futuristic, in a sense, because the idea of the book, just to explain, is that everyone in this imagined future has a chip in their head which gives them instant internet access, which seems like it would be really cool, but that also means that they are constantly suffering from this barrage of advertising. Like, they're being bannered essentially all over the time. So if you look around the room and you like a shirt someone's wearing, suddenly you know how much that shirt costs. You know where you can buy it, and in fact you can order it automatically just by sort of thinking about it. So that's the idea. And so that as a result, people are becoming very odd and stupid in a sense, because they are constantly having this sort of onslaught, this marketing onslaught in their thoughts. So in a sense, the thing is that sure, the technology embodied in the Feed is one that it has turned out over the last 7 years or 8 years since the book was published, people have actually investigated a lot of the things that I talked about, just because that was the trend that things were, that was the direction things were going in. But it was more important to me actually the allegorical dimension of this, because I feel like all of us, in a sense, already had that feed operating within us. We all had the voice of advertising speaking to us constantly, telling us what we can be and what we are and what we should be. And so, to my mind, therefore, the fact that the technology might or might not exist is irrelevant in the sense that what I was getting at was an emotional state that we had already entered, as I felt, by the beginning of this millennium.
Absolutely. One thing we've been focusing on is, where is, specifically children's literature, just because that's what we're focusing on, where is that going when kids today are being brought up in a society of video games, internet, constant bombardment of advertising, and TV even is probably the worst culprit of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And where does reading have a place in this culture that now we have computer classes as young as first grade that kids are learning how to use the internet and utilize what it has? Where does reading factor in all that? Where do you think?
Well, I would say that the importance of reading, and this remains true, is that it allows people a certain depth of knowledge after you, it allows people a certain depth of knowledge after you have delved into a particular subject in a way that that the internet does not yet offer, and television certainly does not yet offer. I think that that there is a superficiality to knowledge that is conveyed through other mediums. Now that isn't necessarily true. For one thing, you can actually go online and find sort of heavy-duty articles about cognitive science or environmental science or whatever it is you want to find, and read them entirely on the internet, and that's great. It's amazing. There you are in your house in Timbuktu, able to download things. But still, the point is that I think is the value at the moment that books offer above and beyond other media, is a comprehensive knowledge of a subject which allows for depth as well as a kind of a general coverage. And I think the danger of kids being trained so solely to rely on these technologies is that they are going to become less able to deal with the kind of the vast complexity of individual subjects. There is a kind of with superficiality of knowledge comes mythologization as well. It's easier to mythologize, say, a Islamic enemy than to understand what Islam is and its own ruptures. But on the other hand, if you are going to combat some elements of Islam and embrace other elements as your allies, as we need to do, you also need to be able to make those kinds of distinctions and understand the history of it, understand some of its its religious background and that kind of thing. So I feel like the danger, in a sense, that we have seen in the last 8 years has been reaction based not on comprehensive knowledge of issues, but rather on a fragmentary and illusory knowledge, a mythologized knowledge. And that is unfortunately what is very, very easy to come across in the internet. And and it's very hard to come across substantive knowledge on the internet. As for the future, I think that one of the interesting, there's some positive elements too. There's some positive ideas, I think, of what can come out of this revolution. Art forms that we've only started to glimpse. For example, I often have thought, wouldn't it be amazing to write essentially a hypertextual novel? That is to say, a novel which does not need to be linear as on paper, but instead has click-through, you could call it. So that, for example, references that might be complicated, it would be kind of cool to be able to lead then to a link that would further your understanding of it. Or, the way that people do on blogs, the kind of comic way that you say, I had a really bad day, and you link to something that is a picture of a person being eaten by ants or whatever else. You know what I mean? Like, you can have sort of that kind of humor as well. But the neat thing, I also think, in terms of envisioning a novel that would be hypertextual in the way that a lot of knowledge is now, would be, for example, if you imagine, say, a Dickens novel that takes in all the different social layers of one part of a city. Wouldn't it be incredible to have someone, give an order to a servant and continue their conversation, but you can actually follow the servant out of the room, as it were, and read about the next section where the servant goes down to the servant's quarters and says, I can't believe what they're talking about up there. And then you can sort of shuffle back up and see what, you know, I mean, it would be very amazing to have that. Another narrative form that I think is being explored, and I think that your generation is going to turn out some true artists in this form, is the video game. And once the game can be conceived of as an artistic form, I mean, I think, you know, the problem with the game as an artistic form is that what you end up with is a narrator who is the player. And because of the restrictions of various different kinds of cognitive disciplines within the computer, that also means the narrator has to be kind of blank. So you end up with the protagonist of the story, the most important person in a novel, being the one person in a video game who has to have no inherent personality. See what I mean? And so it means that at the moment, there's a narrative gap there, because you end up with an uninteresting person walking around an interesting landscape. To my mind, the moment in which that's going to pass into art is the moment someone realizes ways to overcome that gap. And for example, it would be, I mean, I'm sure people have done it and I just don't know about it, you know, but things like, well, for one thing, when they actually managed to create a paradigm for dialogue that is much more flexible than the paradigms for dialogue available now on the computer, I think that will make a major difference to that as an art form. And you'll start to see, in fact, people who can, as it were, create dialogue that needn't happen in any particular order or whatever else, but, you know, characters who can converse as characters in a book would. And that will be extremely exciting.
Wow. Never thought about hypertextual novels and such.
But I mean, I feel like that's what we have to, in a sense, like in the same way that printing changed the way that we thought about how a novel, I mean, in a sense, printing created the novel in some ways. You know?
Do you think that, that